Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you on this rainy, gloomy Tuesday. I actually like rain. Sometimes I get annoyed with rain, but mostly it just makes me want to curl up with a good book. I know you're shocked by that. Instead of curling up with a good book, how about curling up with a good book interview, in a podcast interview? You can curl up with a nice warm beverage, and this interview that I have today with author Bob Brill. Bob is the author of several books, actually, but what we're talking most about today is his Western series. It's called Lancer, Hero of the West, and then each book has the subtitle of The Prescott Affair, or whatever city the book is set in. That's the subtitle. So depending on the city, that's the affair that you get, which actually sounds kind of silly not silly. It sounds a little odd when I say it like that. All I was trying to say is that they have a pattern to them. So they're always Lancer, Hero of the West, and then there's the Prescott Affair, the Los Angeles Affair, the Santa Fe Affair, the El Paso Affair, and so on and so forth. And there are going to be 10 books in total. He is working on book number 6. And let me go ahead and give you the description of the first one in the series, because that's always a good place to start when you are talking about a series. So Lancer is a good guy, gun for hire in the 1880s, who helps those in need. He respects women and children, will work with the law if the law is honest, and only uses his lightning-quick 6-shooter when needed. Brains before brawn, Lancer is a well-educated, mysterious gunman based in the bustling town of Tombstone. Friends with Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, his adventures take him all over the West. Well-traveled as well as educated, this former Union Army officer takes on injustice and has a good time doing it. So if you're a fan of Westerns, then this probably is a good book series for you to check out, because you know that there will be 10 in the series, and that's always exciting to know that you have a good series to jump into, and that there's many books in that series. Let's go ahead now and turn to the interview with Bob so he can tell you more about Lancer and the series in general. Hi, Bob. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sarah. Good to be here.
I am very glad to have you here. We're here to talk about your series that happens to be a Western series, which is fun. Mm-hmm. Before we get to that, though, if you could just start by sharing a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been around for a long time, let's put it that way, and I've won some awards as a newscaster. I've been basically almost 50 years in radio. That's been my main career. That's what always has paid the bills over the years. I was a newscaster starting way back in the early 70s, and when I first got into radio, and been in radio pretty much ever since. Although I've taken some time out to sell baseball cards, which is my other passion. But radio's really good at it. I was a national correspondent for the UPI radio network back in the 80s and 90s until UPI went away as a radio network and as a wire service that it was. I grew up early in my life. I'm born and raised in Pittsburgh, so I'm a sports fan of all the Pittsburgh fans. Go Steelers, go Pirates, go Penguins. And it's most of my life I've actually grown up in California, in Southern California, where I went to junior high school, and played sports here, and then my radio career of it all over the Southwest. So from Texas to Oklahoma to New Mexico to Arizona, and of course here in California, which is right now I'm a newscaster at one of the local all news radio stations here in Los Angeles.
All right. Thank you. That sounds like a really interesting and fun life that we could have a whole conversation on just your different career paths.
I've covered. I've been covering some of the biggest stories of the last 40, 50 years. I really have everything from interviewing presidents to sports stars to actresses and athletes, and you name it. It's been a fun run. It certainly has. It's not over yet, but it's been a real fun run. I always I did write one memoir called Tales of My Baseball Youth, a Child in the 60s, which is basically about growing up in the 60s and playing baseball. And it's a relationship book. It's about friends, family, coaches, parents, you name it, and how everything evolved for me around the sport of baseball. And it was probably one of the most fun books I've ever had to sit down and write. And I only made one mistake that I know of. So I gave somebody a wrong name. But outside of that, it's things like that do happen.
Fun. Well, we are going to talk about your series. It's the Lancer Hero of the West series. Can you talk a little bit about the series overall?
Yeah, the series, basically, it took me a long time. I've written about 10 books now, and total. And I always wanted to write a Western. But, Western readers are very, very knowledgeable about the West, the Old West. And I just saw that it was daunting, and it took me a long time to decide to sit down and write one and where I wanted to go. And I decided, my father and I, my first book was dedicated to my father. And my father and I used to sit and watch the 1950s and 60s TV Westerns, of which there were myriad. And matter of fact, I actually watch them today when I'm on the treadmill at the gym. And they're just, from the Lone Ranger to Have Little Travel to all these great Western TV shows, because early TV, that's basically what it was easy to do, and everybody loved Westerns. So I had a love for that. And so what I decided to do was, when I decided I wanted to write a Western, was I wanted to create a character that was a compilation that drew from a lot of those different TV characters, and then had my own flair as well. And so what I did was I sat down and I created a character called Lancer. And he's has a mysterious background. Each book successively you learn a little bit more about his background. And he's a good guy gunslinger for hire. He works out at Tombstone. That's his home base, although he's really from the East. He interacts with real life legendary characters, Wyatt Earp, and every book starts out in Tombstone, so he interacts with Wyatt and Morgan and Burge and Doc Holliday and the bad guys, Johnny Ringo and Ike Clanton and all those guys. And then I create some characters within that too, because he's a ladies' man. He's a respecter of women, he's a respecter of kids. And he has basically three rules, which he never states, but if you read the books, you understand that. First, he uses his brains first, his brawn second, meaning his fists. And then if he has to use the gun, you're dead. So it's not going to make any difference because he's an excellent draw. And he has a sweet tooth, so he always carries around Turkish Delight, which is one of my favorites, and that's my contribution, my sweet tooth, and my biggest contribution, I guess. And basically, he is hired out of Tombstone to go solve crimes or do stuff to, work through problems that people are having in other parts of the country. And the first one took place in Prescott, Arizona, and happened to be, I chose Prescott because that's where I had my first radio job. And I liked Prescott. I just found that it was a great Western town that had a lot of heritage, and I also knew enough about it that I could, wouldn't be too far off base. And then there's been 5 so far, and this is going to get kind of a little bit confusing here. There's been 5. There's been Prescott, Los Angeles, Santa Fe, El Paso, and New Orleans. And I'm currently in the process of writing Broken Bow, which is Nebraska, which is number 6, which will be out in probably April. It'll be out by April for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a new publisher, and my publisher wanted to start reissuing the books. So what we did was, coming out January 7th is the first Lancer as a reissue. It'll be at Barnes and Noble. That's our deadline date for Barnes and Noble, is January 7th. So it'll debut there. And there's only going to be one change in the book. And I guess if the books really take off and become this wonderful giant, whatever famous book series, the ones that are out now, the ones that you cannot buy anymore because we had to take them down. But if you already have a copy of Lancer Hero of the West, the Prescott Affair, there's a mistake in it. And the mistake has been corrected for the reissue, which is coming out in January. And that mistake was a big one. It just so happens you never trust. Sometimes you don't trust the editor. Although I do love her. It was a different editor than I have now. And sometimes you just don't trust spell check, because Doc Holliday spells his name with 2 L's. Holliday. Of course, the word holiday for Christmas or whatever is 1 L. And I specifically wrote Doc Holliday with 2 L's. However, twice in the book I use the word holiday to mean the holiday, of which 1 L. And when I did a final take of spell check, and I used, word and where you could replace all of them, and I meant to replace the words that didn't get replaced, and I replaced the words that weren't supposed to get replaced. So Doc Holliday's name shows up as HOL1LIDAY in the first book. So if, like I said, if these books become tremendously famous down the road somewhere, the first issues will be collector's items, the ones with mistakes. So those are going to be the valuable ones.
Nice.
And right now,
well, that's really.
And I'm writing this book. A new book I'm writing now won't be number 6. It'll be inserted as number 2. We changed a little bit of the lead. Well, I didn't really change the lead into book 3, but I did change the lead into book 2. So the new book, which will be out in April, will actually be a brand new book. It'll be the 6th one in the series, but actually it'll be number 2. And it really doesn't matter too much, because the books don't necessarily tie to each other. They're all standalone books. So, but just, that's going to be a little confusing for folks. So.
All right. Well, that is really exciting. Congratulations on that. You said that Lancer is a bit of a compilation of kind of Old West figures. Was there a specific inspiration for him, or did he just kind of come together as that compilation?
I tried not to do one specific character, although, I think there's probably more of some than others. And I think if you're a fan of those TV shows, you'd probably see more, depending on which show you were a fan of, you may see more of one of those TV characters than another. You may see more of Josh Randall from Wanted Dead or Alive than you do of Johnny Yuma as the rebel. You may see more of Paladin and Have Gun Will Travel than you do of the detective in Tales of the West. So, you're going to see, and you certainly see a little bit of the Lone Ranger in there as well. So, it all depends. Yeah, the reader will see something different from reader to reader. So I can't really say that it's any more than, I tried to make it so it wasn't any more of one than another. But sometimes, you get off on a track and it may turn out that way.
Mm-hmm. And what about him do you think will resonate with readers, especially readers of Westerns, who I would imagine have very specific images in their heads of their heroes?
Yeah, they do. It's not really a blood and guts book or a series. I tried to stay away from that because I wanted it to be available to juveniles as well as older adults. And when I write these types of books, I write them so they can be read on a 6-hour plane ride from LA to New York. then you pick up the next one and you read that one on the way back. I want you to be able to have it so you can pick it up at the airport and just read it on the way there. So they all run about 200 pages, and the fact that I think probably the most specific thing about them and about the character that people like is there's always a woman in the book somewhere. Like he has at least one incident with a woman. He's very respectful. He's obviously wealthy. And he's not your typical, he's not a dandy, but he embodies all the things that you would hope to have in a Western hero, with the added fact that he's mysterious and you want to know more about his past, but he's not going to reveal that. There's little bits and pieces that, like I said, in each successive book, I reveal a little bit more about the past. And the 10th book, there's going to be 10 total. I write about one a year. So when the 10th book comes around, I already know how it's going to end. I'm not going to tell you. But it's going to be a little bit
come
different.
on.
And no, I'd have to kill you if I did. The last book, you will know more. The whole history of Lancer will be revealed in the last book. So I'm hoping that when people read the book, if they're fans of the series, they would kind of guess, well, gee, did he do this? And then end up finding out, oh, golly, I knew that. I knew that's what Lancer was about, or I knew that about him, or darn, I didn't. I think that one caught me by surprise. So that's kind of where I'm going with it. And the 10th book, I've already picked the city, and I will tell you this: there's something in one of the previous books that will indicate why the last one happens in that particular city. But I won't tell you what the city is, or that'll give too much away.
Okay.
But yeah, it's going to be fun. Like I said, the last one's already laid out in my mind, even more than I haven't picked the other three cities that I haven't written about yet. Broken Bow is the newest one, and that's up in Nebraska, which is a little farther out of the extent of the territory Robin has taken. Mainly he deals with from probably that up and down line from Nebraska west.
We're going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking about some of the more famous or possibly infamous characters that Bob includes in this series. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I'm speaking today with author Bob Brill about his Lancer, Hero of the West series. Before the break, we were talking about some of the towns or cities or places that Lancer travels in this series. And now we're going to talk about some of the other very well-known characters that pop up in this series. You mentioned that you include characters like Wyatt Earp and Virgil Earp and Doc Holliday. How was that writing characters? They're really, I don't know if they're so well known, but their caricatures are kind of so well known. How was it writing fictionalized versions of those characters?
Well, the reason that it's easy enough to write is you hit the nail on the head. They're fictionalized characters, they're legendary characters, and the cool thing about it is most of what we know about Wyatt Earp and Virgil Earp, they wrote themselves. So they lied. They made it bigger than and through movies and TV series and books and just it's the old story of Person A tells person B a story, and he tells it to person C, and it changes to person D. By the time you get to person 10, it's not even the same story. And so
Right.
it's easy enough to take advantage of that. And usually the entire first chapter deals with his communications and dealing with the characters of Tombstone. And then by chapter 2, he's off on his way to the assignment that he's taken, whether it's El Paso or Broken Bow or Los Angeles or wherever. And the story picks up from there. And you really kind of leave Tombstone and his characters behind. Occasionally, at the end of the book, he'll come back to El Paso. To Tombstone, excuse me. And there'll be a little interaction. And in a couple of books, there is a pickup. There is a correlation between the gunfight at the OK Corral, which he's not there for. He leaves the night before, and he comes back. In the next book, he is at the end of the trial of Wyatt Earp and his brothers for the killings that took place at the OK Corral. So that's the only connection where two books kind of correlate. But that's an exception to the series, and I wanted to do that because they were only there for the early 1880s. They weren't there for the entire 1880s. So the adventures take place all 1880 to about 1882, 83, and then there'll be one book that'll take place after that. But that's kind of where it is. But it was kind of easy because I really liked the fact that everybody I think has Kurt Russell in their head as Wyatt Earp, and Sam Elliott as Virgil Earp, and Bill Paxton as possibly as Morgan Earp, and from the movie Tombstone, because that's the most popular movie. Mm-hmm. If you go to Tombstone, which I did last year, all the pictures, well, not all of them, the majority of pictures, and even the billboards outside of town, leading you to town, showing Wyatt Earp, it's Kurt Russell. It is definitely Kurt Russell's face, and I mean, they may change a little bit. I don't know if they got his permission to do it or what, but there's so much Kurt Russell. It's like you can own that town. And so, that's ingrained in everybody's mind. So I kind of, in a way, have to kind of play off that a little bit as well, just for familiarity. And because, Wyatt Earp's been portrayed in so many movies and books over the years. I mean, it's just been strange. I mean, Victor Mature played Doc Holliday, and there was nothing that they were alike in the film and Doc Holliday. So, but it was fun, and it is fun writing. It's one of the things I really kind of get into when I'm writing these books.
Well, I definitely had Val Kilmer in my head whenever Doc Holliday was mentioned, so I understand where you're coming from.
Well, the interesting thing about that is the interesting thing about having Val Kilmer there is, that was probably the greatest role he ever played, the best job of acting that he ever did. And so everybody remembers Val Kilmer. And like you mentioned, you included, and I do too. And you have to kind of figure, is it a Southern accent? Is it a New England accent? Is it an Eastern accent? Because everybody played him differently. And so I kind of mix it in a little bit. And my whole thing is, you'll never see the face of Lancer on the cover of my books. There's two things I require. Number one, his face is never shown, because I want the reader to imagine who that character is through the writing and their interpretation of my writing. And the other thing is, there's always a holster but no gun. There's bullets but no gun. And that's to signify that really Lancer is a man of nonviolence. He only uses gun if he has to, and he will. He's pretty much a lawman, but he's not an official lawman. But he solves crimes and everything. But he never wants to use the gun, and that's kind of where I am. It's like I don't want to see the gun used, but there's always a shootout at the end because it's a Western. So sometimes it has to happen. So, but yeah, so those two things are my requirements, and when we go into publishing covers and things like that.
So how much research do you do for each book?
Research is interesting in today, when you're writing today, because first of all, the internet is so helpful as far as, like, when I chose Broken Bow, actually I was looking for the story that I'm telling. I wanted a town in western Nebraska because it sort of leads into Wyoming, the story. And I can tell you that this book has a little bit of cavalcade in it, which her name was Emily Watson in the life, but she was known as Cavalcade. So that's a little bit more where the next book's going. But I was looking for a town. I looked for off and on for about a year, trying to figure out a town in western Nebraska. And of course, if you're going to do a town, you kind of have to have it incorporated by 1880 or 1879 or in that era. So there were a lot of towns that I could have chosen that were bigger than Broken Bow, except they weren't incorporated until like 1890. So, if you write a book that has to be centered in a town or a city, and the people in that town or city happen to read it or hear about it, you're going to get some real flack about it. And so that's one of the things. And the internet is extremely helpful for that. I mean, I was able to, just use Google and find out a ton of stuff. And a lot of stuff is done in this type of book as far as research. It's mainly two things: the locations and things that happened or were available at that particular time. When you're writing history, even if it's faux history, so to speak, or literary history, whatever you want to call it. For instance, in the El Paso book, he had to take the train part of the way. Well, I had to figure out and find out what trains were available, what rail lines were actually in existence at that particular time. I couldn't say he took the train if there were no rail lines until 5 years after that. So that, again, there's great information online, actual documents, and I think that's kind of where the most of my research comes from. A lot of it is, just stories that I know the story I want to write, and then I create it from there. And sometimes, there's other things, like I had just the other day, I had to find out what the price of beef was. When you sell a cow, you're selling a cattle herd, because the book's about rustling, in 1881. Well, 15, 20 years ago, to find out what the price of cattle was in 1881 in western Nebraska, would have spent a lot of time at the library and doing other research and sending letters, and the process would take forever. I had it in 6 minutes. 6 minutes maybe. That's a long time, So the documentation, I mean, it's just that easy to find out that kind of information when you're writing historical novels.
Really interesting. Just not something that I ever thought that I would need to look up. Maybe you didn't either.
It came to me as I was writing. It's like, crap. What was it? If the rustlers are stealing cattle to resell, what would be the price that they could sell it below market value? Since they're selling stolen cattle, it doesn't matter what they sold it for $1, they're making money. But if cattle at the time was $40 a head, and so they could sell it for $25 a head if they stole it and make a ton of money. Well, how much money do they have to make in this particular story? Well, they had to make $10,000 to the people they're sharing it with. So how many cows did they have to steal? And I had to go back and change that once I wrote it, because it doesn't. Well, the numbers don't work. How many cows do they have to steal at what price, and what take them to market, and getting them to market, and how many people were involved, but they had to split the money. It was something I didn't figure on when I started writing the book. I said, okay, this is something I got to figure out. And again, it took me less than 6 minutes to get that information.
That's amazing. I'm just going to say it again. That's amazing. It's amazing what you can find on the internet and how much easier it can make research, especially for a historical series like this one. Time for our second break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be speaking a little bit about some of Bob's other novels, some of his other writings. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, Bob was talking about the amazing research facts that you can, research that you can do on the internet and the interesting facts you can find when doing so. We're now going to talk about some of Bob's other work, so let's go ahead and get back to that interview.
I know you've been writing for a long time. In addition to the Lancer books, are there any other of your books that you would like to highlight during our conversation?
Sure. There's, I mentioned earlier in our conversation about Tales of My Baseball Youth, that's out of the 60s. That's probably my favorite book. But others I've written, I just wrote a pamphlet, actually a 35-page book. You can find it online or at my website, bobbrillbooks.com. And it's about golfing and baseball, but using an old method that was taught by one of the Major League Baseball teams, as far as using how to refocus your hitting, whether it's a golf stroke or whether it's a baseball stroke. I wrote a book called El Cabo, which is a terrorist novel. It's an FBI chase novel. Basically, it takes place 25 years after 9/11. And it's about Afghani grandsons of Afghani warlords who were born and raised in the United States, who want to honor Osama bin Laden and honor their grandfathers by overthrowing the United States and establishing their own country here. And it's probably one of the best books I've written, and it's called El Cabo, Homegrown Terrorist. And you get a lot of, when people read it, it's usually kind of terrifying, but it's kind of logical as well. And then I wrote a book called No Barrier, which is a nonfiction book. It's about how the bad things that the internet has done. The title is No Barrier: How the Internet Destroyed the World Economy, and how everything changed for economics around the world, whether you're a low-paid job or a high-paid job or an investor or a government employee in Nigeria. All the things that changed. And the book was outdated almost 2 weeks after it was printed, although it's still great information and a great story about all the things. I talked to economists and some reporters and people who deal with the economy around the world at the UN. And it really is it's a fascinating look at what the internet has done and how it's changed and how it's taken away jobs that will never come back, and not necessarily for the better. There's a lot of problems that I don't even get in to the meddling in politics. There's sort of a hint of it there, but It's just all the things. And I wrote it a few years ago. And let's see, what else have I written? Of course, my very first book was Fan Letters to a Stripper, a Patty Wagon Tale. This is a coffee table biography of Patty Wagon, who was a burlesque queen in the 40s, 50s, early 60s, who married a Major League Baseball player by the name of Don Rudolph, who pitched for the, among other teams, he pitched for the Washington Senators and died prematurely. So, and that's a large coffee table format book, printed by Schiffer Publishing back in 2009.
I actually saw that book on your website, and the name definitely gets your attention. I have to admit.
I've written a screenplay on that, and we're still shopping that, called Major League Stripper. And I've written 18 screenplays and pilots that we're still shopping and we're still working on, with trying to get them sold. And that was my passion script. That's the one. People ask me, say, "Well, do you mind if there are rewrites?" I said, "No, I don't mind." But when it comes to that script, I've got to have more creative control because I have some promises that I made to family members that I want to keep. But not only that, it's a story it's a great love story. It's a story about changing moralities in the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s. And it covers about an 18-year period, to 20 years. It's just a fascinating story about these two people who fell in love, and through all the turmoil of the changing times, one being, there was a period, he was married to a stripper and they wanted to keep it quiet because of Major League Baseball's rules. But when he went back to the minor leagues, the minor league owners used her to promote minor league baseball. So it really is a fascinating story, and it's mainly told through fan letters. I pretty much own the estate, and we have hundreds of fan letters. I think we used like 80 of them. We just reprinted them, letters that people wrote to her, and we, photographs, 150 odd photographs plus the letters. So we just printed the letters. If they had a phone number or an address, it was on there, and we left it in there. And we figured, at that point, most of the letters were from the mid to late 50s, and the guys that wrote those letters were either dead or, or moved away or wouldn't care. We were hoping to find a congressman or something that wrote her a letter, but we didn't find any of those.
I know that you also have a podcast. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I actually have two of them. We have one called Interesting People with Bob Brill, where we interview interesting people. More, not so much interesting people, we interview people with interesting jobs. And we look at it as every job is interesting, whether it's a dirty job or whether it's a clean job or whether, you own we interviewed the folks who own Rennie's Moving and Storage. They've been around for 83 years. And who could say they've been around for 83 years? They were the movie company of the stars. They moved Ronald Reagan from Sacramento to the White House. So they had some great stories about all this stuff. But we interview people about just, the kind of work they do and everything, all kinds of stuff. Publicists, we have a world championship wrestler, we have a Chinese actress, So there's that one. But the one we're most concentrated on now is it's called Kramer and Brill, a fantasy football podcast. And of course, as you know, fantasy football is a $3 billion a year industry. And Eric Kramer, who's my friend and colleague and co-host on the show, is a former NFL quarterback. He quarterbacked the Lions, the Bears, the Chargers. Identifies mostly with the Bears. And so I'm a big Steeler fan, but I've been playing fantasy sports for about 50 years, since I was a kid. And even before current type fantasy football existed, we played fantasy sports. And we do it every Tuesday. It's good for a week. And what we do is we preview, we look back at the week and the predictions we made, and then we give hints and helps about players you should have in your lineup this week. And then we do game by game, go over the players that, what we believe they're going to do and how valuable or what they're not going to do for that week's game for your fantasy football. And now right now we're in a time when fantasy football playoffs are taking place, so it's kind of it's really an intense time with the waiver wire and stuff. And those you can find on Libsyn, on iTunes.com, radio.com, the mobile app, Stitcher, pretty much anywhere where you find your podcast. Or for the fantasy football, just our website, the easiest place to go, Kramer with a K, KramerandBrill.com. And right there at the top of the podcast, it says, click here for our latest podcast, or you go to the podcast page. Either one takes you right to it. So it's really simple. And mainly because there's probably about 1,000 podcasts on fantasy football. So I don't even tell people to go to radio.com or any place. Go to our website. It's right there. Easy as pie. You don't have to do any research. Just go there. KramerandBrill.com. And then, of course, my books you can find on BobBrillBooks.com. January 7th is the reissue of Lancer, The Prescott Affair. That's your Hero of the West.
Right. Yep. All right. Thank you for that. You've had quite the career, and you've written in lots of different contexts. So, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
The biggest thing I can ever tell an author is to sit down and do it. You know, the biggest hurdle for anybody that wants to write, whether you're writing a book or you're writing stuff for like blogs or columns, because I write a weekly column too. I write a weekly baseball column called Baseball in the 1960s, and I always wanted to do it. And that's my era where I'm most familiar, where I grew up, and I love the 60s as far as baseball is concerned. And there are myriad stories to write about. And the biggest hurdle I had was just choosing not what to write, but what the theme I wanted to write and what I wanted to do. And once I sat down and I said, I'm just going to start writing, I developed a format in about 10 minutes where I wanted to be, and it's evolved over the years where I'm adding video as well as links and things like that. But the biggest thing I could ever tell any writer is to just start doing it. It doesn't matter how bad it is. It doesn't matter how good it is. Just do it. Because once you get into doing it, once you sit down, carve out an hour, carve out 20 minutes, carve out whatever, and you physically start to write, you'll never stop. My biggest problem, as far as my writing is concerned, is I can't stop. I literally can't. You know, I mean, I've got usually 4 or 5 projects that I'm working on, whether it's a couple of screenplays, a couple of books, whatever. I'm in my column, my weekly column and podcast. I'm doing so many things. Sometimes I'm overdoing, and you know, I need to refocus. And so the biggest thing I could tell writers is you have to just start writing, because once you do, you know, and don't worry about writing an hour a day or a half hour a day. Just write. Just write. And when you're done, stop. You know, and when you feel like starting again, start again. You know, and then once you figure out where you're going and what you want to do, you'll figure out a discipline, and you'll work out a discipline for yourself that you'll be able to then structure into books or columns or articles or whatever you're going to write, or podcasts or YouTube stuff, whatever.
When you take the time to read, I assume you like to read Westerns, but what are your favorite authors and genres?
Actually, my favorite genre to read is, I love reading books about presidents, U.S. presidents. And I would tell you that probably the last 5 books I've read in my life are all books about presidents. I'm currently reading the book on Donald Trump by Bob Brill called Fear. But probably one of the better books I read was by an author by the name of Brian Kilby, which is the story of Andrew Jackson, which was very fascinating. And I think that's kind of where I like to read. I like to read about the Civil War. And I think when I was growing up, I read a lot about the Civil War. And another author I really like, and someone I think may have interviewed, is Jimmy Christina. And Jimmy actually is a friend of mine. I like reading his stuff. But he wrote Jonah Blue, which I have not read, and if he hears this, he'll kind of slap me. But I read his book called Jefferson's Chance, which was fantastic. It is a Western. Jimmy writes Westerns too. But I think probably my favorite stuff to read really is stories about U.S. presidents. I just find it fascinating because I love American history, and that's kind of where I've always been a history buff, and I think that's kind of where my heart has always been when it comes to reading and I can't even tell you if I have a favorite sports writer because I don't. But yeah, as far as books go, it's U.S. presidents mainly.
Nice. Yeah, I actually like those types of books as well, historical biography, kind of that genre. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've mentioned a couple of websites, but can you said Bob Brill Books is where people can find your books.
Yeah.
How about social media? Are you on social media where people can find you?
Yeah. Facebook. I have several Facebook sites, several Facebook pages. Twitter, of course, which is at Bob Brill. Instagram, the Bob Brill. And the easiest way to find out anything about me, if you just Google Bob Brill or Bob Brill Reporter, those two things. If you Google Bob Brill, I come up 17 of the first 20 items on Google. I'm not Bob Brill the bodybuilder, so get that picture out of your head when you see it. I'm not Bob Brill the drummer for Berlin, and I'm not Bob Brill the Oscar-winning set designer. And that's why, if you like, you can find out more about me, Bob Brill Reporter, and it'll tell you about some of the things that happened in my career. And everybody always wants to know about. Everybody always kind of wants to know about me getting beat up in the riots in LA in 1992, which is another entire story. So it's the easiest way to find me. Just Google me, and I'll come up.
So, Bob, we have talked about several different things today, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you especially wanted to bring up about your writing or books or anything in general that we haven't talked about?
I think we pretty much covered it. We're looking forward to, the launch of the reissue of Lancer, Hero of the West, a Prescott affair, which, like I said, is January 7th. That'll be on bookstore shelves and Barnes & Noble and other booksellers. And then coming up before April, right around April, we'll release the next book in the series, which will be The Broken Bow Affair. And we always do that in time for the Santa Clarita Cowboy Festival, which takes place here in LA County. And it's a big cowboy festival. And that always takes place toward the end of April. And I always try to get the next book out before then because I appear both days there. And we sell our books there, and we sign them and do whatever people want, and get a chance to meet some of the readers and Western fans. So it's a great place for that. So it's usually the same weekend as the LA Times Festival of Books, which I hope they're going to change it this year because we have a lot of competition for that. But yeah, so we'll be looking forward to that. If someone's in Southern California, they can check out that the Santa Clarita Cowboy Festival. I don't think they set a date. I know it's in April, but I'm not sure the date yet. So, and we usually do a Facebook blast for that and let people know that they can check that out. And if you are a baseball fan, please check out baseballinthe1960s.com. That's all. Type that in, and you'll find that when you Google me or whatever. We're looking for more followers. We've been writing that column for over 2 years, and it is very, very popular. And we get a lot of people that just really, really like it. So that's kind of where we're going. And on my YouTube channel, if you want to check that out too, we're adding more stuff to that all the time. We're working on a direction on that. So you can go to the Bob Brill YouTube channel and check that out too. So hopefully I'm out there pretty much everywhere. It won't be that hard to find me.
I guess my last question for you is, do you sleep? You seem very
not
busy.
Very often. I am, and part of the thing is, and I'm not joking when I say not very often. It's because 2 nights a week I work the overnight, so I'm on the air as a news anchor at the radio station here in LA from midnight to 5. I work from 9 to 5, and at 9 I have a couple hours of prep, and then from midnight to 5 I'm on the air anchoring the news. 2 nights a week, and then I work usually a Saturday afternoon and sometimes another day during the week. So I average about 3 to 4 days a week. So my sleeping habits in the middle of the week are really, really different. And so when I'm not writing and I'm not working, I'm sleeping, and when I'm not sleeping, I'm working. So it does leave a whole lot of time for a lot of social stuff that I'm finding out this year I'm actually turning things down because I've got too many social events, which is really kind of cool. You know, it's one of those years that my wife says, "Wow, we're turning down parties to go to." And I said, "Yeah, I know, that's interesting." A few years ago, I wouldn't have turned down a party at all. So, but it's been, I've always kind of looked at it. I figured out my life one day. I said, you know, I guess what it is I figure out how much time I have during the day, and then try to fill it. And sometimes I have to kick back and smell the roses a little bit. Say, okay, just kind of walk away for a little bit, and which lasts for about 2 hours, and then I'm back doing whatever I'm doing.
Nice. Well, Bob, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's been fun. Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it, and anytime we can talk about Lancer, I'm always up for it. So, because it's a fun series to write, and I'm looking forward to big things. And one day, book number 10 will be done, and I'll find something else to do, but which I think is hard to figure out.
It's a fun series to read as well, so thank you.
Thank you again to Bob Brill for joining me today to talk about his Lancer Hero of the West series. As he said, there are 5 out. He's currently working on 6. The first one will be re-released on January 7th, so that might be the perfect time to start in on this series. Get to know Lancer as a character and get to hang out in the Old West with the likes of Wyatt and Virgil Earp and Doc Holliday and many more. So thank you to Bob. Thank you as always to you, my listeners. I so very much appreciate you. If you are a fan of this podcast, here's the part where I say, please help me out. I would love it if you could, of course, follow us on social media. Of course, like us, follow us, share our posts, retweet, do all that wonderful stuff. But also, if you could subscribe to this podcast, that would be amazing. And if you could give us a 5-star review, that would be super duper amazing. I would so very much appreciate it. Thank you as always for joining me. I hope you're having a wonderful week so far, and I hope, you know, if it's rainy or if it's snowy or no matter what the weather is where you are, I hope you can find time and a comfortable space to curl up with a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.